Get ready to rock.
20th anniversary. Welcome to our GRTR at 20 podcast series. We've chatted to Todd Rundgren several times during our 20-year history, and at the end of March in 2005 we touched on various aspects of his career, including Patronet, his use of technology, the album Liars, which was released in 2004, and here we start by asking him about his influences.
I didn't have a whole lot of disposable income, let alone my own record player. So it wasn't a lot of records. My influences, up until I was, say, 14, up until I and everyone else discovered the Beatles, listened mostly to the music that, my parents played in the house, in particular my father's kind of contemporary classical and show music of the more highbrow kind, and a few other things as well. He got swept along for a little bit in the folk music craze, so he was buying the Smothers Brothers because they were funny, and he was also buying like new Christy minstrels and things like that, So there was folk music, and that all came about, I guess, right before the Beatles. And that would have to be the first time I ever thought about purchasing records.
Mm.
So the very first record that I bought, I recall, was the Beatles' second American record, which was completely different. The records in the early days between the English releases and the American releases were completely different collections of songs, with songs like Roll Over Beethoven on it. And I listened to that constantly, bought all the Beatles records that came out subsequent to that, and did expand my collecting a little bit, but it would be mostly, and ironically, or not ironically, things like Dionne Warwick's first album, which was more or less the Stake in the Ground by Burt Bacharach. That suddenly everyone realized it wasn't just Dionne Warwick. There was this incredible songwriter guy. Was born and grew up in Philadelphia, right there on the Mason-Dixon line, as it were. And if you got any further south, you would have sort of like rednecks and religious fanatics protesting any so-called white station, that would play music by black artists. So I was fortunate enough to be sort of right there where black met white or whatever, and you could hear a lot of that stuff on the radio. A lot of my audience has been there, not for the entire duration of my career. They are at least contemporary by a half a generation. So, and hey, my eyesight started going when I was in my mid-40s, and regardless of how youthful you try to remain, age is inexorable. So I look at those people, and at first I think, geez, I never expected to be playing for a bunch of graybeards, And then I suddenly realized, a lot of them are still younger than I am.
Oh, yeah.
They're all gray and stuff.
Yes. The main thing is they appreciate the music, obviously, and they've grown up with that music, really. But you find a more perhaps mixed audience where you play in the States or anywhere else, or is it generally an older audience that you play to?
Well, I do have a fairly loyal core.
Yeah.
I've been there for a long time, and in particular cities, yes, it'll be maybe, one of the few times they get out and see a show. There is some, an unusual phenomenon if you survive long enough, which most musicians don't. Most musicians' careers are probably 10 years or less. And of the few that get up to, the 40-year mark like I do, have the advantage of those rabid older fans forcing their children to come to the shows, or having force-fed them the music since they were infants. It's just as ingrained in them as it is in their parents. I think that all things considered, if you were a young and somewhat talented and outgoing person, thought you were going to be involved in the arts, nowadays I think that kids would be more excited about either being involved in films or being involved in game design,
That's right.
as opposed to longing to be a musician the way that everybody and his brother did in the 60s. And, that's probably smart, because the music business isn't in its halcyon days right now. We're in a sort of a musical dead calm right now, where there's nothing exciting happening. And the more exciting things are happening in other media, in other arts. Even being like a more traditional sort of fine artist has, you have just as much possibility of success. It's no longer that kind of, freewheeling gold rush thing that happened in the 60s and 70s with the music business.
No, which is great, really, that you've been part of that, really, and you can sort of look back on that, and you've been witness to those changing times. Just to go on to the Liars album, Todd, because that really, I have to say, having known your name, and I mean, it's a terrible thing to say perhaps, but I'm sure it applies to quite a few people, that you hear one album that suddenly turns you on to an artist, and then you start investigating all the back catalogue. And that's exactly what happened with myself, really, last year with Liars. Brilliant album, one that we push very hard on the website in terms of promotion and review and everything. Has it been a generally good reaction to the album?
Oh yeah, the album got, unexpectedly, in my case, a lot of attention and a whole lot of great reviews and best ofs of the year citations and that kind of, which is not something you actually can strive for. Like you can try and make people like what you're doing in one way or another, but you can't guess where people's heads are going to be at by the time the music actually, reaches their ears, which is, has been one of the big problems with a top-heavy music industry, where, an artist like, if we can put out of our mind all of his latter-day problems, but Michael Jackson, at one point, he and everyone else thought that every time he put an album out, it would sell 20 million copies. But it's just inevitable that either, people will lose interest in you, or people will lose interest in the medium, or, the style becomes stale, And when he came out with a record that essentially was like all of his previous records, the tastes of the audience had started to move on. And so you take 3 years to make a record. By the time people hear it, they've gone completely on to some other thing and think that what you're doing is just the most passé thing. People are going to react to record. Most people aren't familiar with the history of the recordings that I've done to this. They only remember the last one, which for most people in Britain might be No World Order, since I came and toured behind that. Or it might be something further back, and even much further back, that no perspective on what's happened in the intervening time between the last album they remember and this one. So it may seem as if every album was perhaps as involved as this one, or was less accessible in some way.
Would you call it a concept album, Tom?
Well, it was a concept only in that all of the songs were about the same overall topic, but there was no attempt to, aside from having a certain kind of atmosphere overall about the record, there was no attempt to conceptualize the music beyond that. It was not. I wasn't trying to push it either towards techno or towards something else, but it would just drift there as a natural result. So it's stylistically eclectic. It took me about 6 months to do most of it. There were a couple of songs that had been done before that. And the problem was it took me so long between songs, because I was trying to do a whole song and finish it. And I came to realize that, this may be a good way of working for some people, but it's not the best way of working for myself. I have to essentially just block out the time, block out the 6 months, as it turned out for this record. I did have a few other things to do within that period, but for the most part, say, okay, now I'm going to start this record and I'm going to work on it until it's finished. I'm not going to take a break or shelve it for a while or anything like that. And I don't know whether you're absolutely sure how long that'll ever take once you start that process. But for me, it was no longer a question of simply writing a song and finishing a song at a time. I had to write a dozen songs and work on and finish a dozen songs at a time.
So you're saying that you worked on it pretty solidly for 6 months?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had some touring obligations sprinkled within there, but I would say that at least a good 4 months of it was just solid work on the record.
Yeah.
And I could say that an album like The Individualist had a concept on it that would have made it in a traditional commercial sense less programmable, let's say, to put something on the radio, because the songs were like 7 and 8 minutes long and weren't structured in a normal sort of verse chorus way for the most part. And then the record before that, for instance, No World Order, was infinitely inaccessible in some sense, because it was based around the concept of the music not being the same way every time you listen to it.
Mm.
So there were millions of combinations, some of which may have been accessible and some of which may have been completely inaccessible. So,
that was available on a CD-ROM, wasn't it?
That was actually supposed to be the ideal format to listen to it in, because you would be able to impose sort of filters and restrictions or certain desires about what was performed and the nature of the sound of what was performed. In other words, for any particular 4-bar section of the music, there would be, the full sort of mixed version. There would be versions with no vocals on. There would be instruments pulled out, so that you could say that you wanted to listen to the karaoke version of the record. It would play only the bits that had no vocals on them.
Right.
So,
fascinating, and again ahead of its time. But you say that one, it's not actually available, is it? Because of it's deleted, is it, Todd?
Yeah, well, it was done for what are now, I guess, obsolete platforms, and there was no impetus to redo it all. Though I still have all of the elements that went into that, and I actually did implement an online version of it, where people could control what was played, but it was all streamed. I mean, the idea of doing these sort of fixed media, commoditized type products is actually, it's already obsolete. We keep doing it because there's still a market for it.
Yeah.
But everyone realizes at this point that it's going to be a world of wireless iPods at some point, essentially, where everything's just being beamed at you, and what you want to capture and listen to.
We could have a whole interview, really, Todd, about your production work, but a lot of people will know you for your work with the likes of Meat Loaf and the original Bat Out of Hell album. But when it comes down to your own personal preferences, I mean, are you as interested in the technical side of the music making as much as the actual creative, playing the instruments? Has it always been a 50-50 split, or because I think people have that image of you as someone who embraces technology, really?
I think that is somewhat of a misinterpretation. It's not that I have a predilection to embrace technology. I have a comfort level with technology that most people probably don't have.
Yeah.
I am unintimidated by technology, which is completely different from being enthralled with it.
Mm.
I don't own a cell phone. I don't drive a car. I have other priorities that supersede any of my technological fascination. For instance, I want people to think that I am eternally available to them. Therefore, I don't own a cell phone.
Mm.
And that wasn't a technological decision, even though everyone expects you to have a cell phone.
Mm.
I find the level of technology that I'm comfortable with. As a matter of fact, I'm talking to you now on my Skype phone, which essentially is my laptop.
Oh, yes.
So I do have a phone number that I can travel around with me, but it's not going to ring in some inconvenient place, and I'm not going to be tempted to put my business on the street by talking on the cell phone in the airplane cabin so everybody can hear me.
Sounds a good idea.
I don't know I don't know what's wrong with people sometimes in the technology that they blindly adopt.
Now, what about when you come to produce yourself, Todd? Because, I mean, for instance, who do you use as a sounding board? Are you that person, or how does that work for you? I have this vision of you working in solitary, and I know that's probably totally wrong, but do you ever...
Totally right.
In some far distant place with your computer, but I mean, how do you get because it's nice to get people to to play stuff to people, and I mean, I suppose you've got your sons or whatever, but how would you get a reaction to the work that's in progress?
I don't. I don't ask people. First of all, I put myself in the other person's place.
Yes.
Who is going to tell me honestly in the first place? Who's going to think? I can hear it. I know better what he should be doing than that. I mean, after all this time.
Yes.
A lot of what I've accomplished in my life, I will fully admit, has been through intimidation. I don't think my kids would be the great people they are unless I had every once in a while intimidated them. And a lot of what I accomplish, I have to accomplish through subtle intimidation. Even musically. And in that sense, I don't want to ever put anyone in the position where they have to try to not only judge what I'm doing, but try and figure out a way to tell me their opinion.
Yes, yes.
In a way that they perceive won't offend me or whatever.
Yes,
but
difficult.
Beyond that, I can't create without solitude.
Right.
And that's why, it's exclusive to having someone like over your shoulder and offering opinions and stuff. The ideas won't come to me unless I shut out all other input. And when I was getting to the more critical parts of this record, that's exactly what I did. I went to another house where nobody was, set up the microphone in the linen closet, and only I choose what input I will have. Probably sit there watching a Major League Baseball game in high def and not caring at all what it's about, just letting my mind drift off for a little while until it starts to tell me what it wants me to do. And if there's distractions of any kind, that process can never start. So, for any number of practical reasons, no, I work in solitude. And that doesn't mean I can't collaborate, and it doesn't mean that I won't involve other people in the performance of the music. But in terms of the competition of the music, I'm never interested in anybody else's opinion. Let the chips fall where they may.
Well, that's fine. That works for you, and because I noticed I don't think you've used other musicians on this new album. I think you did have, for instance, you had did you have a sax player? Was it a keyboard player? Didn't you on Live?
I had a couple of guests on Live. I would have had guests on this record if I had the time or the circumstance to put them on. But unlike Liars, I had a deadline on this record, and if the musician wasn't around, I had to either just change what I wanted to do or try and do it myself.
Well, it's come out great, I have to say, Todd, and we're almost up to our time level here, but if I can ask you just briefly, what's happening with Patronet at the moment?
Well, we were actually ready for a relaunch last year.
Right.
And then Vista came out. And since still most of the people who own a computer own a non-Mac system.
Yes.
Everything that we thought was working stopped working. Now, the problem there is that, Patronet is, aside from whatever it is conceptually, it's also a software development thing and a maintenance thing. And when something like that happens, we just don't have the resources to throw at it like somebody whose sole business is to be on the internet.
Yes, I know.
And so it kind of caused us to reboot in a bit, and I think that as time allows, we're going to try and get it back up again. I still think it's something that that differentiates itself from the typical sort of website or the MySpace or the other thing. We have we always had a higher level of priority, of privacy, and selective connectivity, selective interaction,
Yes.
things like that. Just try to, to not so much build a successful business model as try and always define the experience that people want to have.
Yes, I know.
So I think it's still worthy, and hopefully we'll find the resources to get back to it. The success in one area, like if this album is very successful, it creates success in other areas.
Exactly, that's right. I mean, can I just tell, because listeners would want to know, really, this Patronet, was that always a vehicle for your, unreleased material, video, that sort of thing?
Well, I've always believed that, as the record company model was breaking down, which was the principal source of financing for artists, that you could, in one way, cut out the middleman and not necessarily make your fans the replacement of that principal source of financing.
Yeah.
In other words, if they were going to pay at the end of the process, they could pay at the beginning of the process, and what they get in return is at the very least, some sort of progress report, and at the best, a kind of a look over the shoulder at what's happening. The fine line there has always been: are you going to spoil it for them by letting them see it when it's not finished?
Yes, that's right.
And I think trying to figure out the best way to do that, be able to get a look at the process, but not actually hear what's happening.
Yes.
In a sense, so that it'll all be the kind of surprise that everybody wants. Those are the things that it was meant to try and discover. It wasn't supposed to turn into a giant marketing thing.
No, I know.
It was supposed to be a place where we could, refine the experience that people wanted with the artists that they like.
Oh, yeah. Well, fingers crossed it gets back and running in the future. And just to finish off, Todd, you tend to keep audiences guessing about your set lists whenever you tour. Can you give us any sort of little hint about what you'll be thinking about in November? I mean, obviously you'll be featuring the new album, but can we expect a fair cross-section of your old stuff as well?
Yeah, but it will be, by definition, very guitar-centric, whatever it is.
That sounds extremely good.
We will have, there'll be keyboard tinkling here and there, but we're really going to feature the guitars on this.
I think this is going to be fantastic. It's what I was hoping you were going to do a couple of years ago, but I think I'm glad that you've fed off other, you've had the feedback from people, and I think, as you say, it's true that people do remember you as the guitar player in the 70s, I suppose it was, really, and it's nice to see that you're getting back to it, Todd, really.
Well, don't mess with success.
Oh, well,
believing. Hey.
Well, look, best of luck for the forthcoming dates in the autumn, and with the album out in September, we'll be listening out for that and playing it on Get Ready to Rock. And thanks for talking to us, Todd.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.